So in this video, we're going to be talking about feature flags, how we manage them, how we can build our own feature flag system, and how to use it in our applications. I've wrote a blog here, which basically says the same thing. It's a comprehensive guide on obviously what a feature flag is. So again, you can do the description and read everything in this blog. I'll leave that in the link below. Also, just to highlight what a feature flag is, it's known as feature toggle. So say, for example, we implement a new feature on a site. We want to control that using a sort of toggle where we manage that in some sort of system. We will be creating that in this video. So what we will be doing is building a React application. So this React application will handle all of our feature flags and recipes that we have. This then in turn is the CMS or the API management system where we handle all of the feature flags, and then that will then transfer to a front end application, which then shows what we have set in our feature flags. Of course, the feature flag management system is going to be built on React, but we are also going to be having an API and building that as well. So if you look at the architecture, first of all, here we have a React application, which is basically our feature flag application where we manage and update. So we have our CRUD methods, so create, read, update, and delete for our feature flags and our recipes. Then we have Firebase authentication as well. We also have the backend, which is Node.js, and everything is managed in Firestore. So we're going to be looking at things like whitelisting, so only allow API requests to be called from a certain domain URL, like this one, for example. And we are going to be looking at many other things. But what I want to get into is explain to you what a feature flag is. So it allows developers to enable or disable specific features in the application dynamically without deploying new code. So you don't need to do the release process. You can just turn it on and off. They provide flexibility in feature management by letting you toggle features on or off based on different conditions, such as user roles, A/B testing, and rollouts that you want to do gradually. And again, our tech stack that we are going to be doing is the front end, which is React. We're going to have authentication with Firebase authentication. We'll deploy the NodeJS application. We'll also have the database managed in Firebase, and we will also have the authentication with Firebase, and then the React front-end application, we'll also have that. So we essentially will have a front-end application that is authenticated. So for example, you need to log into this application to be able to change the features that then get rendered onto another React application, and then the API is connected to the database, and that manages everything for you. So again, there's products out there that you can do all of this and you can pay for the service, but what I want to show you is how you would do it manually, so building your own system. And what we will do first of all is we will start with the backend and we will look at creating the API. So that is with Node.js and Express, and we will be doing that next. Okay, so in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building an API with Express on Node.js. So essentially, this is a backend API with Express that will connect to your Firestore database. So all of the data is coming from the database, and then the API just consumes whatever's in there. So we'll be adding routes in there. We're going to add our CRUD methods, and then that is going to be able to be consumed by any front-end application, or in our case, we will limit that and add some whitelist URLs in there. So only certain people can access that. So that's what we will be doing. So first of all, let me just quickly go through the architecture. In here, let's go to the back end. We do API requests from our React app with a token. So this token is just to say that actually we are verified and logged in with Firebase. So we are using Firebase authentication to log in. Once we have that token, then the API will say, actually, okay, we can now verify the token over here. And if it is correct in Firebase auth, then what will happen is this set of functions here. So essentially the token's valid, and then it's valid. And then what happens is we can do our CRUD method, so we can get the data for the recipe or the feature flag that we have. We then confirm that, we can update the feature flag. If it's invalid, then we get an error message. So that is how it will work. So let's go ahead and create our API. So first of all, if we open our terminal and clear this, and I'm going to just go into my YouTube folder. So that is CD YouTube, and I'll just quickly zoom in a little. So in here, I just want to see what I've got. So these are all the videos I've got so far, but let's create a folder just for feature flags. So I'm going to make a directory in here, and this is called feature-flag like this. So if I go into this feature flag like that, in here I'm going to have a back end and also a front end. Actually, we're going to have two front ends, but first of all, we'll do the back end. So in here now, what I want to do is create the API. So let's just make a new directory in here, and this one is going to be called API, or you could call it backend, whatever you prefer. And then in here, I want to cd into API and open this in VS Code. So it's code space dot. Okay, so if we expand, and we can actually open a terminal as well. So we're in the API folder, and what essentially happens is in our API folder, we want to create a Node.js application with Express. So what I'm going to do is do npm init-y. And before I actually do that, I'm going to run the Node version and check what Node version I'm on. So let's change this to Node 20. nvm use node 20 like this, and then we just want to create a package.json, so we can just do npm init-y like so. And then in here in this package.json, what I'm going to do is we have our name, we have our version, the main file is going to be index.js, that's fine. And what I also want to do is I want to add some scripts in here, or mainly the first script, which is the start script. So this is just going to be node source index.js, or actually it will be node index.js like this. So it'll be on the same level. And then author is Imran codes, feature flags like this. And then I suppose that's fine for now. So we have our setup in here. What we also want to do is we want to install some packages. So the packages we need, so let's first of all do npm I in here. We need Express because we're creating an Express server. We need also cause and .env as well, and these are basically middlewares, so we'll be using them for middlewares. And we also need nodemon, but I'll put that in as a dev dependency. So, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in our dev dependencies as well. So this is basically nodemon. If we save that and do npm I, so now this will install all the packages that we have. So now that is the package JSON set. What I want to do is I'll just keep it as API, but you should be a bit more descriptive. So we'll do feature flag API, and we will be deploying this as well onto the web. So let me just save that, and let's just clear everything in here. We don't need the debugger. So now we have our node module, the package lock, and our package.json. Now I want to create my index.js in the same directory over here. So now first of all, let me import the packages that we need. So Express and cause, we need them, and then we need to initialize the Express like so. We also need a port, so const port of, I'm going to say 3000, and we can also do process.env.port or 3000 like that. So we have declared the app and the port. Then we need to use the app. So again, we need to use cause, and actually what I'm going to do is leave it as that for now, but we will need to update this to allow here. So you need to use crawl, and then I'm just going to put underneath or above a to do to say that this is going to be where we need to update cause to whitelist like that. And then essentially that is the first part of the index.js done. So far we have the app is using cause, so we need to whitelist everything. We have declared a port, so that's fine. We also need to pass everything to JSON. So let's do app.use, and this is express.json like so. And then here we have routes. So let me just quickly run Copilot and let it do its thing. And let's do the port as well. So now we have routes in here. So these routes, what we're going to have, let me just quickly bring in what the final version is going to be. So if I run the front end application that we currently have, so if I copy this and run this on localhost 5173, so in here, this is the final version. So we have authentication, so we sign in. So let's sign in with Google. So this is where we authorize the application, and this is where everything is working correctly. And again, this is the admin dashboard in here. If we inspect, there's nothing coming back from the API because the tier we're using for the API is the free tier, so we need to get it running, so that's why it's not working. So again, we will build that API out now, and then we'll see the local admin part over here. So again, that section now is working because it's doing cold starts. So here we have our add new recipe, which is on the front end, but then that updates to the back end and it updates on the API. We have our recipes in here, which we can edit and so on. And then we also have the feature flag. So again, if I click toggle, you can see this now is changed to enabled and disabled. And if I click toggle again, then it's showing up here. Again, if I wanted to show my featured this, then I toggle and so on. So that is that final build, final part of the app complete. But each of these have routes. So we have the recipes, which has their own router, and we have the feature flags, which has its own router. So what I'm essentially trying to say is that we should have a controller and also a route handler. So that's what we will be building. So if we go in here, let's go ahead and create a folder. So where we use app.get, in this case, what we will be using is the API slash recipes and our API slash whatever it is. So feature flags in our case. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to define these routes. So let me just copy this and bring in the routes. So we need to build and create these routes in here. So slash API slash recipes will show the recipe route, and the same for feature flag shows the feature flag route. So at the top, what we also need to do is import these, and we have also missed out .env. So let's paste that one in as well. And essentially now we need to create a folder called routes. In this folder, we will have our recipes and our feature flags. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do to speed everything up is I'm going to copy everything and paste it in. So this is our routes folder now, and in here we have our CRUD method. So in here we have feature flag routes like this, and we'll get onto the middleware in a second. But what essentially happens is the feature flag router, so we're getting express and we're doing express.router. Then this router, we have get all feature flags. This is the slash. So basically when we go into our index.js over here, if we're in our feature flags over here, so it'll be slash API slash recipes, and there's nothing after that. So there's no trailing slash. So essentially it's getting all the recipes in here. The post is basically adding a recipe. So it's basically adding to the slash route over here. The update and delete are a bit different because we need the ID. So essentially each recipe will have an ID, and it's basically finding the ID and then it's going to delete it or update it. So that is how the routing is working. And then we just export that router. The same is here again for the feature flags. We have our middleware that runs to say basically this person is authenticated, this person has a token, so therefore it lets you pass this. Then once that's true, then we can basically call our CRUD method. So that's how it would work, and that's how the API works. And again, we are getting the functions. So these are callback functions over here, and it's probably best idea to separate that logic as well. So these are the controllers that basically control the function that you want to happen in here. So in our case, what we will be doing is we will be going to our Firestore database to get our feature flags. So if you see me in previous videos, what we do is to access our Firestore database, we do that in real time. But what I'm going to show you is how we would do it with an API, and so how the API connects with the database, and then that API can then update the front end application. So everything is decoupled in this. So what we want to do now that we've done the route, is we also want to have the controllers. So again, let me just copy that and explain that to you as well. So paste that in. And in our controllers, same thing. So at the top here, we have a feature flags controllers in the controller folder. These are basically the functions that we call. So because we're in the feature flags over here, what I want to do is go into the controller. And again, what we need to do is initialize our database, which we haven't done. So we will be doing that. So once we've connected to the database, our Firebase database that we will be creating, then what we can do is have async functions with try catches in them. This one over here is essentially fetching all the feature flags. And again, this code here, don't worry about it too much because it'll be available for you in the repos at the bottom of the video. So again, we're getting access to the feature flags collection because we're using a NoSQL database. And then essentially we're getting the collection here. Then we're mapping through the docs in there. Each doc is a representation of the recipe. So if we look at the final build, each recipe here has a title, a description, and an image. So you can extend that if you want to, but in our case, we don't want to. So again, in the final build over here, we have ability to edit the recipe and change it. And then again, this will update on the database. So don't worry about that. So essentially, we then create an object which has the ID, which is the document ID. So the ID is generated from the Firestore database. And once that's basically set and everything, the object is created, then we just set it in the JSON over here, and then that is sent to the client. So again, error handling is important. So we can send a 500 error as well to the client just to say actually there's an error fetching the feature flags, and that is basically it. So in our network tab, if there was an error, then we would get an error in here. So let me just quickly zoom into here, and I'm going to refresh and you'll see what I mean. So here you can see we've fetched the recipes, it's returned the response.json in here. So we got the description, ID, image URL, and title. So that is a 200 response. So if we go in our API, this will basically be response.json of the feature flag, or the response will be 500, where this will be read and it will basically say whatever the error is that you have. So that is how it works. So let me first of all go back in our controller, and essentially it's basically doing the same thing. It's getting the collection, it's mapping through them, and then what is happening is in this feature over here, we're adding the new feature. So when we have the client, we pass in the data from the client to the server. That is then available in the request.body. We're destructuring it. So we're taking the feature name and enabled, if it's enabled or not, out of that. Then we set that to a new object in here, and then we basically add it to our database in that collection. So in the collection of the NoSQL database, a new document gets added, and that document is in the same schema or the same structure as what we will already have. And then on the front end, that will basically add over here. So we add our new feature, whether it's enabled or not, and we set these Boolean or string values in the database. So basically, if we fill this in, we check this or not, we fill this in, we check this or not, this will then update. So I'm just going to put Imran test. This is not enabled, so I'm just going to add that feature flag. We go in here and you can see there Imran test is disabled because we didn't check it. So that means it's false. So here we did the post request to API/feature flag. In here, the payload was Imran test enabled false. So basically, it's updating the database that we already have, but I'll be doing this from scratch. And from there, now we do the post request over here, and then we do the get request straight after. So if we go into the code, so we basically add the new feature flag over here, and then straight away after we fetch it. So this is done on the client side. So again, this is the same to toggle the feature flag. And again, we get the feature flags database. If there's not a doc in there, then we basically add a guard clause. Again, we want to toggle enabled field. If it is changed, then we can do that. And then basically we fetch the updated list and so on. And then the same for the delete in here as well. Then we export everything. So you can see here, get feature flags is exported. Then we go into our routes. In routes, we are importing them over here, and then we are using them in our router, which in turn, the feature flag router is then going into the index.js in here. And basically this is what it is here. So when we interact with /API/feature flags, it goes into the feature flag routes, then it goes into the controller, then it returns whatever we need to the client. So now this is also the same for the recipes. So if you wanted to add more controllers in there, you can do, but we're just going to say feature flag routes and also the recipe route. So that is essentially it. Now the next part is the database. So what I want to do is focus on that, and we will be doing that next. Right, so we built out most of the API over here. What we now need to do is we want to connect Firebase and set Firebase up. So essentially our API will consume data from the database in Firestore. So let's go ahead and go in Firestore. And first of all, what I want to show you is the current or the final build that we have, which is essentially this one, is consuming the data from the Firestore database. So again, over here, we have a collection of feature flags, and we also have a collection of recipes. So that is how you would basically create them. And let me quickly show you how to do that from scratch. So let's create a new project. And if you haven't created a new project, then you just go and Google it and basically do console.firebase.com. I'm going to call this feature flags YT like this. Again, you can name this whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it that. You can enable Google Analytics as well, so we will be doing that. And then again, you would have your account anyway, so that will be set up on there. So again, this is setting up everything we need. So the two items we need from Firestore or Firebase is Firestore DB and Authentication. So we will be setting them up. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I press continue, now if you see this here, it says web. What we want to do is click this, and this is basically to set up hosting for our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say feature flag YT, and let's click this one to set up hosting. There's no deploys yet, but we will be setting that up. So let's register that now. Then we get our SDK, we get our CLI and so on. What I also want to do is install Firebase, and actually this is for front end, so we don't need that. What we want to do is install Firebase admin, and the reason we need Firebase admin is to set up the SDK. So let's just ignore this. I already have this one set on my machine, but if you haven't, then set that. So you just basically copy this, put it in your terminal and paste it in, and it'll install everything for you. And this is how you would host your application on Firebase. So this is mainly for the front end app. We are going to be using something called render to deploy our API for our backend app. So let's just continue the console for now. So that's essentially it. So in build here, we first of all need to set the authentication up. So let's just get started with authentication. authentication. And I'm just going to set up Google authentication over here. That's the easiest one. And again, we can just basically fill in the information and then press save. So that's as simple as it is for authentication. So that's the authentication setup. We also need to set up the database, so Firestore database in here. And the database basically is the where we hold our recipe list, our feature flags, and so on. So essentially, it's just create a database in here. You can choose the location. I'm just going to choose Europe because I'm in Europe, and then we can start in test mode. But again, if you look at production over here, you basically need to set some security rules up. So this is an extra step that you need to do to secure your data. So what we'll do is we'll start in test mode. So let's create this. So now that's creating, what will happen is we are getting everything set up. So this is our Firestore, and then we need to configure our collections in this database. So again, it's basically the ones we have. So again, I'm going to go into my code in here. If we go into our controllers actually, and over here you can see the collection we are making is recipes. So let's copy that one. Let's create the collection of recipes, click next, and then we want to generate an auto ID. So that's the document itself. And then in here we have the, if we go into recipes and then the response, and you can see here we have the keys and the values. So let's do the key of title first of all. So title is a string, and that is spaghetti carbonara, like this. Then the description, we'll just do the description. And again, this one is creamy pasta, but essentially we are setting some data in here, and the image URL is the last piece of information, and this one is essentially from this URL. So now we save that. So that's our first collection complete. We just need to do another one for our feature flag. So that's quite simple. We go in here, feature flag is feature name and also enabled. So let's go in our collection, create a new collection, and the collection name is feature-flag. And to double check that, again, we go into our feature flags controller. Database we're calling is feature flags, like this. So let's go in our Firebase, paste that in, next, generate a random ID, and then we need the two keys and values. So feature name is going to be featured dish, and again you can have multiple in there like the dot theme, and then the featured dish is going to be enabled as true. So enabled, and we change the type, so this is a boolean and this is true. So we save that. So that's all fine. We have a feature flag and the recipes now, like that. So that's all good. So now what we want to do is connect the database to our API, and the way you do that is through Firebase admin. So we need to install that. So let me go in here and do npm I firebase admin, firebase-admin, and that will install for us. And then what I want to do is create a new folder called config, and it's going to be in Firebase, the files firebase.js. So now let's double check that the Firebase admin has installed. So if we go in here, you can see Firebase admin has installed. So now all we do is const admin is equal to require Firebase admin, like so. And then we want to initialize, or we could do the service account, and basically we get access to the account that we generate. So essentially we need the admin SDK. So initialize Firebase admin SDK, and that is the credential is admin.credential.cert, and then that's the service account we are importing over here. So what we need to do is create this file. So let me just copy this, or we'll actually import it in. So the way to generate this SDK is, if we go in Firebase, in settings over here, project settings, it says here service account. So if you click on that, and now what we want to do is we want to, you can see here Node.js, this is basically what happens. So we want to generate a new private key. So let's generate that. So now you can see this is over here. So essentially that's in my downloads folder. So what I'm going to do is open this, and I have it on my other screen. So what essentially I'm going to do is create a new file called service account key.json. So service account key, or whatever you want to call it, and I will add it in and be right back. Right, so now that I've added that in, essentially it's basically connecting our database to our API. So we can basically close this one off now, and what I'm actually going to do is create a git ignore file. So when we upload the code, it's not included, and essentially in here we exclude the node module, and I'll just fill this with many others, but essentially we want to also ignore the service account JS. So that's config / service account, and I'll actually just copy this, rename, copy this .json, like this. So now that's saved. So now I think that's pretty much done. There's one more thing missing, which is the middleware. And what I'm going to do is talk to you about the middleware next. Right, so now that we have everything set up, what we want to do is do the middleware and create that. So what I'm going to do is, there's two middlewares that we need. First one is essentially in our route. So let's be in our routes. And you can see here, we have a Firebase auth middleware that runs before we do our CRUD methods. So before we get our feature flags or we add our feature flags and so on, we have a middleware over here. So that's the first one. And then the second one is to whitelist any URLs. So in our case, in cause, we want to whitelist our domain. So only certain domains can basically access this API. So that's what we want to do as well. So let's go ahead and create them. So let me create a new folder. And actually what I'm going to do is just copy my middleware folder and bring it in and explain what's going on. So we have our middlewares folder. In here, we have the first one, which is Firebase auth middleware. In here, we want to get the token from the client. So from the front end, we pass in a token through the headers. So in here, we have our Firebase auth middleware with request, response, and next. The token is from rec.headers.authorization, and then we want to split it so it's whatever's after the space in the header in the authorization. If there's no token, return a 403, which is good defensive programming. Otherwise, we decode the token. So we essentially import admin from Firebase admin over here. Then we verify the ID token if it's correct. Then we do request.user is equal to the decoded token. Then we do next. So next basically is a special function that says actually they're fine, so they can go to the next thing. So in our case, that is essentially in our route. We go in here, then they go next. So we do this function over here like that. Otherwise, we handle it over here saying this person's unauthorized with the 401. So that is the Firebase auth middleware. The second one is how to whitelist the certain URL to be able to access our Node API, and we will do that one next. Right, so now we've created the Firebase auth middleware. What I'm going to do next is whitelist our URL so that our API only accepts requests from certain domains. So first of all, we need to authenticate with Firebase. So they need to be authorized through there. But second of all, they also need to have a whitelist. So in whitelist.js, we have this function over here. We set our allowed origins. So these origins are set in the env file. So again, we can basically create origins that we have. So what I'm going to actually do is create an env file with some allowed origins, and let's just do that. So let me just do .env and paste it in. It's essentially localhost 3000, 3001, and 505173. Again, if you deploy, when you do deploy, we want to update this to whatever our URL is. So we'll just keep it like that for now. Again, this is the allowed domains. If it doesn't have any, then we just have an empty domain, which means that all of the domains are allowed. So again, we want to get that origin. So request.headers.origin, what is the domain name of the person that's accessing our API. Again, allow only if origin is whitelisted. So if our allowed origins includes the origin coming from the requester, then we basically set the header over here to whatever it is. And then after that, we set header to allow methods of get, post, put, and delete, which is what we need to do anyway. And then again, content type authorization, and then we do next. So this whitelist middleware is over here, or what I'm going to do is add it in here. So let's just import this in. So const whitelist middleware is equal to require of the path, and then in wherever is Firebase auth middleware, after that, what we can do is we can add it in. So that's an extra check in here. So let me save that. And then essentially this now, so if we go in this is a function module.exports Firebase auth middleware, and then module.exports whitelist middleware like so. So now we have two sets of middleware in our application. One more check we need to do is on the cause. So what I'm going to do is quickly add the cause in. So and explain what's going on. So let me just delete this and paste this in. So essentially app.use.cause, the origin, we get the origin and the callback, and then we can basically say if there's no origin, return callback of null and true. Otherwise, again, this is basically what we have over here. Or what we can do is, instead of that, we can do whitelist middleware like this. and then save that. And then we don't basically need it over here in our feature flag router, so we can basically delete that. And that's two ways of doing it. So let me just save that. But essentially now that is our API complete. So let me just do npm run start, and now you can see here it says server is running on port 3000, so that's good. That is working correctly. Let me just change this actually. So in index.js, what we want to do is we can add the port in on the env file, or what I'm going to do is change this to 5002 because I've had quite a few APIs open. So now I need to close this and do npm run start. You can see it's 5002 now. What I could also do is in my package.json, in here I can change this now to nodemon index.js because we have installed nodemon. And then if I was to change the index.js port number once again to 5003 and save, this should update. But again, we need to quickly run again. Now it's there 5003. If I change it back to 5002, now nodemon is working. And again, you can see the port number is updated as well. So that is fine. That is the API complete for our feature flag router. What it also is our database is complete. So essentially now what is going to happen is the database that we have set up here is connected to our API. So that is perfect. But also we need to deploy our API now. So what we will be doing is we'll do that next. Now that we've finished our API, what we need to do is deploy it. So again, let's go ahead and do that. So in here, I'm just going to create a repository name, and this is going to be feature flag API. So this is basically our backend. Let's make it public, create the repository, and essentially we want to add this remote in here. So let's go in our code, let's clear everything out. So paste this in, git remote add origin and so on. And then essentially what we need to do actually is initialize the repository. So let me just do git init, and then we have everything set. So git init, then we set the remote in here, and then we can commit our changes. So what we can do is git commit -am, so add everything, and then in here we want to say completed feature flag API like this, and then save that and press enter. And let's just actually do git add because that command didn't work. So git commit -am, and then our command, and then we just need to do git push, and then it'll tell you what you need to run. So you just copy this, paste this in, and press enter. So now that's pushed all our changes to our repository that we've created. So let me just refresh the page. Now you can see everything is all set in here, and again we have everything all up to date. So Firebase JS uses basically the service account key.json and these credentials, but we need these credentials when we deploy. So what I actually am going to do is I'm just going to actually delete this one, and I'm going to add this to our file structure because we do need this. So actually what I'm going to do instead is add the variables in the env file. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's quickly just add them in. So let me just go into my code, and we just need the project ID, the private key, and also we don't need the key ID, so I can delete that one, private key, and the client email. So let me just double check. Yeah, so then that's fine. Then we can basically copy this, put it in the env file. So command X, this is our private key. So it's process.env.private_key, like so. Then we have essentially the client email. So let me just quickly do private key, which is our private key. So I'll paste that in. Then we need the email, I think. So let me just double check, which is actually the project ID. So this is going to be command X and process.env.project ID. So let's add that into the env. So project, paste that in. And then the final one is the client email. So again, we'll paste that in as well. So client email equal, and paste that. So they saved in the env file. Now all we need to do is copy these. We can delete this now, like so. And then in Firebase JS, we don't need the service account anymore. And we can just basically paste in the object in here, like so. And now we have our variable set. So that's all good. So now what I want to do is deploy the code. So let me just quickly do git add in our code, git add, and then git commit, like so, and then git push. And so I just need to quickly go into this URL and then fix it. GitHub prompts me to basically select a command, so allow me to expose it. So now I can basically do git push. So now that works, and that is all complete. So now we have our feature flag code, and if you go in config in Firebase JS, we now have our envs set over here. So now we go into something called render.com, which is basically where we deploy. And if you haven't got an account, you just go into here, you log in through your GitHub, and then that connects all your GitHub repositories to this over here. So now what I want to do is go into dashboard, and essentially if we go on new over here, and then what we want to do is create a web service. And you can see here I've already deployed one, but let's go ahead and create a web service. And this is basically what we've created, which is the feature flag API. So let's select that and connect. So now that's everything pretty much already set for us. We want to select the free tier for now, and we want to add our environment variable. So what we can do is set it from the env. So let me just quickly go into our env in our local code and copy everything, and then we can basically paste it in over here like that, add variables. So we have our env variables now over here. Everything else is fine. So we have node-index.js. This is the service that is the free tier service. So this is the region we have it in. So if you want to use another one, then you can do, but I'm going to use the free one. And then all we need to do now is deploy the web service, and then this will basically build everything for us and then upload everything to online and give us a URL that we can consume. Right, so now you can see here we've deployed everything and our service is now live. To get the URL, we can see here, let's just copy this one, and then essentially we want to paste it in. So now you can see it's saying cannot get slash, but that's fine. What we want to do is do /API/recipes, because that's our route that we defined in our Node.js application. And now you can see here it says error. So you can see error fetching recipes. Let me just try feature flag, feature-flag, and let me just double check what we named the feature flag first of all. So if we go into index, and it's feature flags with an S, so let's just add the S on, and this is not going to work. So the reason it's not worked is because when we interact with this URL, we essentially want to pass in a token through the headers as well to say that actually they are authenticated with our Firebase account, and then we can show them the data. So essentially, let's just do API/recipes one more time. And it says here error fetching recipes is not showing us the error, so we can debug that later on. So now that is how you deploy your API onto the web. What we want to do next, and in the next video, we will be building our admin dashboard, which is basically this dashboard over here that we can do many CRUD methods. So we can add more recipes in here, we can update, delete, and also view the recipes. So this is what we will be building, and it's the same again for our feature flags, and we will be doing that next. Right, so now that we've created our API, what we want to do is build the front end or the dashboard for our API management system. So this is essentially what it is. This is where we update our API, so then we don't need to manually interact with our database or the API. So this will do that for us. So what we're going to do is basically we can close this off now, or actually let's just keep that open. But if we cd up one level within the feature flag folder, and in here what we want to do is create a v app. So let's just do Control R, and we want to do vite like this. So npm create vite latest, and then again we're using the React template. This is going to be named as the FF management system or something like that. So feature flag management, and let's press enter. This will install everything for us in the folder, and we'll open the, actually you can see here it says it needs node 18. So let me just cancel out of that, and let's just do npm use node 20. So let's install that, and then we will install our feature flag management. So we need React, we'll use TypeScript like so. So now we'll do ls, we have feature flag management, so cd into feature flag management, and then we'll do code dot. So now this will open a new VS Code terminal for us with all the boilerplate inside. So now let me just quickly open a new terminal in here. This terminal is going to be using node 20 as well. So let me just make sure by doing npm use 20 like that. And now if we go into our source folder, essentially what we should have is the boilerplate, but we don't want to use that. So you can see here this is all of the boilerplate, and I've done plenty of videos on how everything works in V, and also with Create React App and others frameworks. But what we want to do is run npm I first of all, which will install all of the packages for us. And essentially now we have the index. So then if we go into main.tsx, we have the app which gets run on there. So that's fine. App has counter. So let me just quickly delete everything in the return block. We don't also need the count in there. So let me just delete that. And then in app.tsx, what we want to do is we want to have React Router DOM installed. So what I want to do is do npm I react. This is for our routing, React Router DOM, because if you think about it, we need the initial route, which is the login route, and then once they've logged in, then we show them the admin page, and then we fetch the data and so on. So that's why we need that. So it's React Router DOM, press enter. So that will install React Router DOM for us. And what I'm going to do is copy what I have in my app.tsx and paste that in. So now we have a login component, an admin page component, and a protected route component. So I'll quickly explain what's going on. So we have a router, which basically comes from React Router DOM. And in here, we have two routes. The first route is to // which would render the login page. And then once we've logged in, essentially we get navigated to /admin, but then we have a protected route higher order component that then renders the admin page. So what I want to do is in source, I'm going to create a new folder called components. So in source, we create a folder called components, and I'm going to create a login.tsx. So this is the login page that we need over here. And then let me go into my login component and then paste this in. So now you can see it says here we have some functions or methods from Firebase itself. So now we will need to install Firebase. We have a navigate, which basically navigates to /admin, and the login with Google function, which basically is what we click on. We authorize ourselves and authenticate ourselves with Google, and then we get navigated to that page. And then the sign in with pop-up function, which again passes in the auth and the provider. So again, we need to set up Firebase for this again. So what we need to do is first of all set that up. So in my terminal, I'm just going to do npm I Firebase like that. And then I also need to create a new file. So I can do that in a helpers folder. So in source, in here we could just do a helpers folder. Because the project's not so big, we're just going to do that. And this is going to be firebase.ts. So this is where we need to basically do all the Firebase connecting on our React application. So now that's installed, we go over here. We've created that one. We need to create these two as well. But first of all, what I want to do is in login, we need to create the auth. So let's go in Firebase, in firebase.ts. If you remember where we created the web app, we need to go into that again. So in Firebase over here, if we go into our web app, so if we go on projects settings in general and we scroll down, this is what we need over here. So this is the project settings we need. So in our firebase.ts, we can paste this in. These are all of the credentials that we need to connect to this Firebase. But what we should do is again put these in env files, but we can just leave them for now. And what I'm also going to do is basically add and update the imports over here. So that is fine. We need to now essentially initialize Firebase, and then we also need to initialize the services. So in our case, it's auth. So get auth, and now we can export auth and also sign in with Google, which is basically the function that signs us in with Google. We have already authenticated and added that check in as well. So if we go into authentication in the sign in method, you can see Google is enabled. So that's fine. And what I'm going to do is go in here and save now, and then login. We need to import auth from the right place. So control space, and it's in the helpers. So that's that error gone. So let me just save that. And what I also want to do is create these two components so that we don't get a white screen on /admin route. So again, let's create protected route. So the protected route, I'm going to actually copy and bring in, which is basically a simple function, which is a higher order function that checks if this person logged in. So the protected route takes in children, which we are passing in the children, which is the admin page over here. That's fine. We have a loader, which is set to true, and we have a user, which at the minute is null. So the initial state is null, and then that gets updated based on the auth state change. So this function here on auth state change comes from Firebase auth as well. It takes in the user as the first argument, then a callback as the second. The user then is basically updated with the state over here. So it basically sets the user to whatever the user is in being returned from the auth state change, and that is basically an object that is set via itself. So here this will be the user type or null, whichever one it is. So if we click through, this is the info that you get for the user info, but I'll leave that for now. And then this is basically run, this unsubscribe, when the component mounts, so basically on the page load, and it only runs once because we have the dependency array in there. Then we have some guard close checks. First one, if it's loading, then just show loading. That's fine. If there's no user, then it navigates us back to the home page where we need to render the login page. Otherwise, we return the children. So in our case, the children is basically the admin page. So what it will do, it will navigate to /admin. If there's no user, then it navigates back to the home page. If that passes, then obviously we render the children. So that is the protected route complete. Now we need to do the admin page itself. So let me just copy this, and there's a lot going on in the admin page, but what I will do is first of all paste it in, and then we'll explain what's going on. So there's plenty of functions in the return block, but what I want to do is I want to first of all delete everything in here. We want to install or import in useState, which is obviously used. We have the user, which is coming from Firebase auth itself. Use effect we need to import as well, and also the auth, which is fine. These are functions we don't really have at the minute. These are all functions, and these are components that we have not created. So what we can do is we can comment this one out. We can also comment this one out, and also this one along with this one. And I'm just going to return this as a string for now. And then these functions aren't used, so we can just comment them out like that. And again, we can just comment that out as well. So now let me just save this. There's certain types in here that we already know about, which is from our database schema. So in here, if you go into Firebase database, the types we are essentially needing is a object that is enabled true and feature name as a string, which is coming from feature flags. And then for the recipe, it's pretty much an object of description, image URL, and title. So let's again bring in them types, and they're quite simple. So I can just basically copy what I have, and in the helpers actually, or you can create a types folder, but what I'm actually going to do is paste it in at this level, and actually I'll bring in source in there. So these are the types. So we can now go in admin page and import them types, and then feature flag type as well. So now we essentially have no errors. These ones basically are saying that it's not being used, which is fine. But what I wanted to do is just basically have the basics set up. So now let me just import in the admin page, and then let's run with npm run dev. This will start our V application. So 5174. So let's copy that and paste this in over here. So now we can see we have a sign in with Google button. So let me just click on that, and now it's authenticating me. And let's actually just check in our authentication in our Firebase console. It says signing method, but we don't have users. So let's log in first of all. I've logged in with my Gmail account. So now we're on /admin, and if we go into here and just go back in, you can see now we are authenticated. So that's the first part done, which is we are authenticated, and the navigation and the initial setup is complete. What we want to do next is we want to build out these methods over here. So what I'm going to do next is build out this add new recipe component along with fetching the recipes in here, and anything to do with the recipes, such as when we click edit, we show the edit recipe and all of that, and we will do that next. Right, so now that we've got the initial boilerplate set up, what I want to do is, as well as just having it created, I want to install Tailwind as well, because again we need to make sure that everything looks good as well as making a dashboard management system. So again, let's go and install Tailwind. So that's quite simple. We can just basically copy this guide over here with V. So essentially I'm just going to paste in these commands that Tailwind suggests for me, and then we need to do npx tailwind css.init -p. So let me do that one. This then creates these files for us, which is post CSS and tailwind config, and then we can essentially copy the content. So that is in tailwind config.js. So let me find that one, which is here, and paste in the content. Next step is we copy this in our index CSS file. So let me just go in index.css and paste that in. So now if I save everything, close this down, and then npm run dev. Now that basically should have our Tailwind styles added on. So I can close this down. In here now, so with Tailwind, it adds no style until we add the styles. So if you want to know more about Tailwind, I've done a crash course, so you can look at that as well in my YouTube channel, and that will help you out on how to understand Tailwind. But let's crack ahead with this. So in admin page, first thing we want is, let's first of all create the UIs. So the first UI is the add new recipe, and again what we'll actually do is create the methods first of all. So these are going to be the CRUD methods for recipes and also the feature flags. So these are the methods that we will have to connect to the API. So this will interact with the API and then update, read, create, and delete them. So in helpers, I'm going to create a new file. And actually, this file is going to be for the recipes. So let me just do the helpers in here. I'm going to do recipe CRUD or something like this. Or actually, we could do recipe.ts like so. And essentially, it's copying everything. So if I paste this in, so these are basically the CRUD functions that we have. There is one issue here. So let me just go through it. You can, if I highlight this one, do Command F, we have this 4 times. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that we cannot connect to the API unless we are authenticated with Firebase, and then we need to pass that in the headers over here as the token. So this token says that actually you've got access to the API. So that's what we need to do. So this is why we have this function, which is get Firebase token. So now what we need to do is create that in our helpers. So I'm going to create a new file in here called CRUD, or actually let's just call it firebase.ts as well. Or actually, we already have the firebase.ts. So in here, we can export another function. So let me go ahead and do that. So this function is essentially this over here, which is get firebase token. So let me just export that first of all. And what this does is it gets access to the current user through auth through here. We can log the user as well if you want to, but if there is a user, then we return the user.getID token. So basically, this then returns a token for us, and then that token is what we are accessing in recipe.ts over here. So let me just delete this. If we import this in now, and then that is what the token is going to be, and then we pass that in through the headers, and then the header says actually this person is coming from Firebase, they've authenticated with the same Firebase that the API is using, therefore then we have the data and then we set recipes as the data. So that is how it works. So that is an important part, so I'll add that in the comments in here. Get Firebase token to authenticate the request and pass to the headers like that. So pretty much the same for add recipe. This is a post request, and again, this is going to the application JSON over here. This is the API that we have set. So in our case, I'm just going to keep it as the one I already have, but it's basically this. So you just copy this and then you paste it in. So the API that you've deployed, that's the one you would use. I'm just going to keep it as this because we have more data in this Firestore database. So we have more recipes and so on. And then what we want to do is we basically have the same for update. Again, the method is put and delete is the method is delete. They all have headers. So therefore we pass in the token. So that is the helpers for that one, basically the CRUD methods. And I'm also going to do the same for the feature flag. So let me just quickly bring that in as well and paste that in. And again, you can see here, we can delete this Firebase token and we can import that token from Firebase itself. And these are all of basically the same, but for the feature flags. Right, so now that we have created the CRUD methods, we can save that. And now we can start with getting the component set up. So what I'm actually going to do is uncomment the helper methods because we can use them now. So now all we need to do is import them in. So these are coming from helpers, fetch feature flags, again, add recipe and update recipe. So now it's just a case of, first of all, if there's no user, what do we want to do with that? So let me just actually delete the items from that one. And we need to create that component. So let me just quickly copy this and bring that one in. So no user, basically it's a button that just says sign in with Google. So again, that is getting rendered correctly. So now we can install that one. And then what I want to do is be logging out the flags and the recipes. So that's good. So now let me save this. And now if we go in our code, in our browser, sorry, then we should be able to see our flags and recipes being fetched from the API. So if you remember, I also did log the token. So we have the user, that's fine. In Firebase over here, we have the user, which is okay and good. But in recipe.ts, I did log the token over here. So let's go ahead in the browser now. And actually, if I inspect and go in my console, you can see here the token is being logged. So that's good. But let me just quickly refresh the page to see if the flags and everything is getting fetched. Actually, it's not. So let me just check. You can see something's happening. And you can see here it says cause error, recipes, and so on. Why that is, I'll tell you exactly why that is because we are not whitelisted on this local host here. So what I'm going to do actually is close the 5173 terminal and let's close this one. And let me run dev again, but this time we're on 5173. So now this should work. So let me just press enter. I now need to re-authenticate because again, I'm on 5173 and we change the URL. So now you can see you fetch in and it's saying 401 now this time. So what's the error this time? But we can see that the recipes are being fetched. So that's good. And now feature flags, what's it saying for feature flags is make sure the ID token comes from the same Firebase project as the service account used. Okay, so what's happened is because we're using the old project URL, that's why the error is occurring. So what we can do is simply just copy this and essentially just change the URLs. So if you do Command D on all of these, paste it in. That's the recipes one, and then we need to do the same for the feature flags. So this will be Command D for all these and feature flags instead of recipes flags. So now let me quickly save this. Now we've changed the URLs, and now if I refresh, we need to log back in again, I presume. So again, these are loading because the service that we've deployed on is obviously a free service, so therefore we are gonna expect some delays on obviously fetching the information. So there'll be a cold start, for example, on this one. So now let me just log in again. We've logged in. We need to wait for this fetching of the API data. But again, we could have a loading state in here to say that actually is fetching and so on. It's not fetching. So now let's just wait for the API to start up first of all. Right, so now you can see here we're fetching the flags and we're also fetching the recipes. So you can see we have 5 flags and 3 recipes, and we can verify that in our Firestore database. So let me go in here. We have 3 feature flags, doc theme and the Imran test. So let me just delete that one. And then we also have the recipes. So that's fine. We've got 5 recipes now. So what I want to do is I want to focus on just building the UI components. So let's just actually go back in here in admin.tsx. We commented out quite a few components. So what we need to do is uncomment them out. So let me just uncomment this one, and these last few here, which is basic React renderings kind of stuff. So now we just need to add these in. So let me first of all import delete recipe. And now it's just a case of importing these in. So we need add new recipe. So I'll just bring that in. So that's the add new recipe where we're just passing in props and just rendering it in. We also have the recipe list. So I'll just bring that one in as well. We also have the feature flag list. So let me just paste that in also. And then let's just go in the admin page and let's see what's missing. So add recipe edit is missing. We have the recipe list and we also have the feature flag list. Actually, let's wait for that one. We need the edit recipe, so let me just bring that one in as well. So now we can bring in edit recipe and we can also bring in feature flag list, which isn't bringing in for some reason. So it's named as feature flag. So let's just rename this actually. So it's feature flag list and again, feature flag list. So now let's save everything and import feature flag list. So now that's all saved. We've got all our information from our API that's connected to our database. And now what we just need to do is refresh. And you can see here now, everything is matched up. Everything is correct. So now what I can do is I can delete the doc theme. Let's delete it first of all. That's gone. And also let's disable the featured dish. So let's see in our API now if that's actually reflected. So in feature flags, I should have 1, which is the case. So that's fine. If I wanted to add that back in, so doc theme here, and we want to enable it. So let me click that and click add feature flag. And now you can see that's added back in, and it's also reflecting in the database. So we're communicating to the database via the API through the tokens. So that's all fine. And now we can also have the edit component here where we can edit this to exclamation mark, save the changes, and then that will reflect as well over here. And that's coming from the database. So that's all complete, and the UI is complete. So basically we have completed the dashboard management system. What you would do now is this is where we would manage everything, but what we want to do, or we should do, is create our kind of front end application that will only read the data from the API. This application here would manage everything that goes into the API. So therefore, this is all preserved and accessible to only admins. So that's why we create this dashboard manager. This is generally for admin staff. They can update and add their features on there. If they wanted to add a new recipe, they can do. Then they basically add that within the featured dish. Obviously, this is all on the third app where we consume the data. So, for example, we would render the application based on featured dish and render margarita pizza, for example. That's how you would work it. So far we built the API and we've built the dashboard manager to manage our feature flag toggle. Again, if you want to read through this over here, which is basically explains what the feature flag is. Now, I'm not going to build the third app to consume it, but it's basically the same as this. It just renders the recipes and whether we should have a dark theme or not a dark theme, and that's based on whatever is updated in the API in the database. So based on the values here, that's what the UI should render. So that's how it works. So now the last thing to do is we are going to basically deploy this onto the web. So then that is our secret URL that we can use to manage our API via this dashboard. And we will do that next. Right, so now we've completed the application. What we want to do is get it deployed to the web. So we'll be using Firebase to deploy it. So let me just go in our code. So in our terminal, what we want to do is we want to log into Firebase first of all. So that's quite simple. It's Firebase space login, press enter, and then this will log us into Firebase. So essentially allow Firebase to collect CLI information. If you want to do that, you can do, you press yes. And then now we authenticate with Firebase. So let's log in and authenticate. So this opens the browser and then we allow everything to be authenticated in here. So now we can go into our terminal once again. And then we want to initialize Firebase. So it's Firebase init. This will give us a set of commands that we want to use. And essentially we want to do hosting. And the public directory we want to use is going to be the dist folder. So let's just do dist in here, because when we run npm build, that will be the dist folder, so the lightweight version and the bundle of our application. And then we want to create a single page app. So that is yes. So that's fine. No to automatic builds. That's all fine. Now we need to run build. So it's npm run build here. So now this will create the lightweight bundle for us. Everything can get bundles. So now you can see we have our CSS and JS files, and is in our disk folder. So in assets, we have everything to do with the JS and also the CSS over here. Now this needs to get deployed. So all we do now is say Firebase deploy, press enter, and this will do all of the deployment for us, and we will also get a URL. So this is uploading everything for us. And now what we can do is if we copy this and go into our browser, paste in the URL that we have and press enter. So now you can see this is the final build. We've deployed it onto this URL. So we can just sign in with Google first of all, just to see if that's all working correctly. And now you can see everything is here. The API is not fetching. Let me just quickly inspect that and see what's actually going on. So if we might just need to wait a little bit because of the server that we are using. It has some cold start. So again, because we're on the free plan, it will take some time. So let's just refresh and try again. So now it's basically fetching all of the information. So if we go in the network tab, scroll down, and now you can see we have finally fetched the API data in here. And then now if we basically edit this margarita pizza and add some exclamation marks in here and save changes, this will now update the database, as you can see over here. So then if you had a external app, so a read-only app, for example, where we have a website and we want to render the recipes, and we also have the certain features that feature flags enabled, such as if the dark theme was enabled, and then we could set a featured dish, which is the margarita pizza, for example. We can toggle that on or off on the third application, which is the read-only application. So that we are not going to be doing in this video, but essentially it's just the margarita pizza will be dependent on if featured dish was enabled or disabled. This is where we can manage all of our API and database details. So this is the where you log in and you need to be authenticated, and essentially you need to do the same thing again. So that's basically how you would work it. Of course, when you have your read-only application or your website, that would be much better in terms of styling and theming, but that's how you would add feature flags and manage your recipes. So essentially the benefits for this, so if we go into our blog actually, if we go down, it basically shows you how it works. So users log into the React front end, Firebase provides a token on the front end and authenticates the API requests. Basically, the API does all of the processing and the backend processing. As you can see over here, the database manages our data, and then from there you have your front end and your back end. That is basically it. That's how you build your feature flag management dashboard. Then you can have your website and use the API details to be able to only fetch the information. So again, you might want to think about the middleware on this one. So for example, the API for get requests, they could be read only. So therefore, you don't put in your Firebase middleware on that one. And then therefore, it can be consumed by the third application as well. So anyways, give this a read and I hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.